December 1883, Sage Creek, Colorado. Jack Reeves stood before his forge, hammer in hand, same as he had done for 2,847 days before this one. In his pocket, $12. In his heart, nothing at all. On the workbench beside him, a letter from the bank about the final debt. He had 3 days to pay $200 or lose the last house his wife had ever lived in. The forge coals glowed red in the gathering darkness. Outside, snow had begun to fall, the kind that came down sideways in the mountain wind, the kind that got into a man's bones and stayed there. Jack lifted the hammer, set it down, lifted it again. The rhythm had kept him alive for 8 years. The rhythm kept him from thinking. He was thinking now. The letter sat there with its clean-typed words and its cold mathematics. $200. The bank manager had been apologetic about it, almost kind, which made it worse somehow. Jack had built half the buildings in Sage Creek. He had shod every horse, mended every wagon wheel, forged every door hinge and gate latch for 20 miles in any direction. But a man who worked alone, who spoke to no one, who drank his dinner more often than he ate it, that kind of man did not inspire confidence in bankers. 3 days. Jack picked up the hammer again and brought it down on a horseshoe that did not need more shaping. Sparks flew up and died in the cold air. The sound of metal on metal rang out across the empty yard, across the snow-covered street, across the 8 years since he had felt anything at all. The town of Sage Creek had grown up around the railroad. Before the tracks came through in '73, it had been nothing but a trading post and a spring that never ran dry. Now it had 2 saloons, a general store, a bank, a church with a steeple that pointed toward heaven like an accusation. 300 souls living their lives, raising their children, building their futures. Jack was not one of them. He existed on the edge of things, in a workshop that smelled of coal smoke and hot metal, in a house that had been empty for 8 years. People nodded to him on the street, brought him work, paid him fare, but they did not invite him to Sunday dinners, did not ask him to stand up at their weddings, did not include him in their lives beyond the transaction of metal for money. That was how Jack wanted it. He had learned the blacksmith trade from his father back in Missouri, had learned it well enough to make a life out west when the war ended and there was nothing left back home worth staying for. He had been 22 when he came to Sage Creek, young and strong and full of stupid ideas about building something that would last. He had met Martha that first winter. She worked at the boarding house, serving meals to miners and cowboys and men passing through. She had red hair and freckles across her nose and a laugh that sounded like bells. Jack had been gone the first time he heard it. They married in the spring, built a house on the south end of town with their own hands, every board and nail placed with care. Had a son 3 years later, a boy with his mother's red hair and his father's quiet strength. Named him Thomas, after Martha's father, who had died before Jack could meet him. For 11 years, Jack Reeves had been happy. Then came the fire. It started in the barn, nobody knew how. Maybe a lantern kicked over, maybe a spark from someone's pipe, maybe just bad luck and dry hay and the wrong gust of wind. By the time Jack smelled the smoke, the whole structure was ablaze. Martha had been in the house. Thomas had been in the barn, tending to his pony, the little sorrel mare Jack had bought him for his 8th birthday. Jack had been at the saloon, 3 whiskeys deep, celebrating a contract to shoe all the horses for the new freight company. He ran. God, how he ran! But the smoke was too thick, the flames too hot, and he had been too drunk to think straight. He got Martha out, dragged her coughing and screaming into the yard. She fought him, clawed at his arms, begged him to get Thomas. Jack went back in. He found his son in the last stall, curled up small, the pony standing over him like a guardian. The boy was not moving. Jack picked him up, felt how light he was, how still. Carried him out through the flames with his shirt catching fire, his hands blistering, his lungs filling with smoke. Thomas never woke up. Martha lasted 3 more hours, long enough to hold her son one last time, long enough to look at Jack with eyes that said everything she could not speak, long enough to let go of both of them at once. Jack buried them on the hill above town, next to the graves of settlers who had died in the early days. He paid for a stone marker with words he could barely read through his tears. Martha Reeves, beloved wife. Thomas Reeves, beloved son. Gone too soon. Forever in our hearts. Then he went back to his forge and did not speak to another living soul for 3 months. The town had tried at first. Widow Harrison brought him meals. Reverend Matthews came by to pray. Sheriff Brady checked on him every few days. But Jack had nothing to say to any of them. He worked. He drank. He slept when exhaustion forced him to. And slowly, quietly, he died inside while his body kept moving through the motions of being alive. 8 years, 2,847 days of waking up alone, eating alone, working alone, drinking alone. Of hammer on anvil and the same 4 walls and the same empty bed. Of existing without living, breathing without feeling, surviving without any reason to survive. Until tonight. Jack set the hammer down again and looked at the letter from the bank. $200 or 3 days. The house was probably worth $800 if he could find a buyer, but there was no time for that. He could sell his tools, his anvil, everything he owned, but that would only bring in maybe $70, $80, not enough. He could ask for more time, but he had already asked twice before. The bank manager had been patient. Now, patience had run out. So in 3 days, Jack would lose the last piece of Martha that still existed in this world, the house they had built together, the home where Thomas had taken his first steps, spoken his first words, grown from baby to boy. It should have hurt more than it did. Jack was reaching for the whiskey bottle he kept under the workbench when he heard it. A knock. So faint he almost missed it under the wind and the settling coals. 3 soft taps, barely there, like a bird hitting a window. Jack stopped, hand frozen halfway to the bottle, listened. The knock came again, weaker this time, desperate. He moved to the door, hand on the latch, and something in his chest tightened. Nobody came to his door, not anymore, not since the funeral. Not since the day the whole town had watched him stand beside 3 graves and say nothing at all because there were no words big enough for that kind of empty. Jack opened the door. The girl collapsed across his threshold. She could not have been more than 9 years old. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, thin cotton that had no business being worn in December. Her hair hung in tangles across her face, dark with melted snow and something that might have been blood. One hand clutched a piece of paper, crumpled and wet. The other hand reached out, fingers splayed against the wooden floor, trying to hold herself up. She failed. Jack caught her before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing. He could feel every rib through the fabric of her dress, feel the way her whole body shook with cold or fear or both. He lifted her, carried her inside, kicked the door shut behind him with enough force to rattle the hinges. The forge light fell across her face, and Jack felt something he had not felt in 8 years, rage. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, the bruise spreading down her cheek in shades of purple and black that looked days old. Her lip had been split and was only half healed, crusted with dried blood. There were marks on her neck, faint but visible, the kind that came from hands squeezing too hard. When Jack laid her on the workbench and moved to examine her injuries, she flinched away from his hands with a sound that was not quite a scream, not quite a sob. The sound a wounded animal makes when it knows the next touch might be the one that kills it. "Easy," Jack said. His voice came out rough from disuse, scraped raw like a rusted blade. "I'm not going to hurt you." She did not believe him. Her good eye rolled white with terror, searching for an escape route that did not exist. Her hands came up, small and pale and shaking, trying to protect her face. Jack took a step back, hands raised where she could see them. He had not touched another human being in 8 years. Had not wanted to. Had not thought he remembered how. Now he stood there in the forge light, with his hands up like a man surrendering, and something in his chest that he thought had died completely started to crack open. The girl stared at him, breathing fast, shallow. The kind of breathing that came before passing out or panicking. Jack knew both well enough. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She tried to speak, choked on it. Her throat worked, struggling with words that would not come. Jack waited. He was good at waiting. 8 years of silence had taught him patience, if nothing else. "Sarah," she finally whispered. The word came out broken. Sarah Bennett. Bennett. Jack knew that name. Everyone in Sage Creek knew that name. Tom Bennett had owned the biggest ranch in the valley, 5,000 acres of prime grazing land, with water rights that made it worth 10 times that in this drought-prone country. The Bennett Ranch sat 15 miles north of town, sprawling across the foothills where the grass grew thick and the creek never ran dry even in the worst summers. Tom had been a good man, fair, honest, the kind of rancher who paid his debts on time and treated his hands with respect. Jack had shot his horses for years, mended his tools, repaired his wagon more times than he could count. Tom had been one of the few people who still spoke to Jack after the fire, who treated him like a man instead of a ghost. And Tom had stood up at Jack's wedding 15 years back, when Jack was young and stupid and thought he could build something that would last forever. "Where's your folks?" Jack asked, though part of him already knew the answer from the way Sarah's face crumpled. "Dead." She said it flat, the way a child says a thing she has had to say too many times. No tears, no emotion, just fact. Wagon went off the road last September. Wheel came loose on Bridger's Pass. Jack felt something cold settle in his gut, something that had nothing to do with the winter wind leaking through the doorframe. Bridger's Pass was a straight run, wide and well-maintained. Wheels did not come loose there. The road was solid, graded smooth, traveled by freight wagons heavy enough to flatten any loose stone. If a wheel came off on Bridger's Pass, it was not an accident. "And your uncle?" he asked, though he already knew. There was only one uncle in the Bennett family. Sarah's whole body went rigid, every muscle locked tight. Her breathing stopped for 3 full seconds, then came back in short, panicked gasps. When she spoke, her voice had dropped to barely a whisper. "Uncle Clayton. He says he's my guardian now, says the ranch is his till I'm grown." She looked up at Jack with that one good eye. "Says I'm never going to be grown enough." She turned slowly, painfully, like every movement cost her something, showed him her back. Jack's hands clenched into fists hard enough that his knuckles cracked. The dress had torn along the shoulders and down the spine, whether from violence or from Sarah tearing it herself to show him, he could not tell. Through the gaps he could see the welts, fresh ones, still weeping clear fluid where the skin had split open, old ones half-healed and layered over each other like the rings of a tree, telling the story of weeks or months of systematic brutality. They wrapped around her sides, across her shoulder blades, down to her lower back where the dress still covered. Some were thin lines, others were thick as a man's finger, raised and angry. And stamped into the worst of them, clear as a brand burned into cattle, was the pattern of a silver belt buckle. 3 horses running, manes flowing, captured in ornate detail. Jack had seen that buckle before. Clayton Ward wore it everywhere he went, showed it off like a trophy, like proof of his status. Custom made from a silversmith in Denver, cost more than most men in Sage Creek earned in a year. Sterling silver with gold inlay. Distinctive, unmistakable, unique, evidence. Jack made himself breathe, made himself think. The rage was still there, burning hot in his chest, but he pushed it down. Rage would not help Sarah. Rage would make him stupid. He had been stupid once before, and it had cost him everything. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats crunched through frozen snow. 2 horses, moving fast, coming closer. Jack moved to the window and looked out through the gap in the shutters. 2 riders emerged from the darkness and swirling snow. The first carried a lantern that swung wild in the wind, throwing shadows that danced across the white ground like demons. The second wore a star on his chest that caught the lamplight and threw it back. Sheriff Cole Brady on his bay gelding, the one with the white blaze down its face. And beside him, straight-backed and rigid on a black stallion that probably cost more than Jack's entire forge, Clayton Ward. Jack had not seen Clayton up close in years. The man kept to his big house on the east side of town, the one with the stone foundation and the imported glass windows. He owned the bank, owned the lumber mill, owned half the businesses on Main Street and most of the politicians in the territory. His money came from cattle and land speculation, and making deals that somehow always left him richer and everyone else scrambling. He was 48 years old, looked younger, clean-shaven, hair pomaded, and perfect even in a blizzard. Wore clothes that came from Denver or San Francisco, clothes that said money louder than words ever could. And at his waist, catching the lamplight, that silver buckle with its 3 running horses. Jack turned back to Sarah. She had gone pale, every bit of color draining from her face. Her good eye fixed on the door like it might explode inward any second. Her hands gripped the edge of the workbench so hard her knuckles had gone white. "That him?" Jack asked quietly. "Your uncle?" Sarah nodded. Could not seem to make her voice work. Just nodded again. Faster. More desperate. "Does he know you're here?" "He saw me running. I tried to hide, but he saw." Her words came tumbling out now, fast and frightened. "He said if I ran he would do worse than before. He said he would make me sorry I was ever born." Jack looked at her. 9 years old. Beaten. Terrified. Alone. Then he looked at the door, at the 2 men outside who had come to take her back to more of the same. He pulled his coat off the peg and shrugged into it. The weight of it settled across his shoulders, familiar and heavy. He checked that the door latch was secure, then stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind him, putting himself between Sarah and whatever was coming next. The cold hit him like a fist. The wind had picked up, driving snow horizontal across the yard, building drifts against the fence line that would be 3 feet deep by morning. Jack could barely see 10 feet in front of him, but he could hear them clearly enough, horses snorting, leather creaking, the jingle of bit and bridle. The 2 riders stopped 30 yards out, just at the edge of the forge light. Both dismounted. Sheriff Brady's movements were slow, reluctant. Clayton's were quick and precise, every gesture calculated and controlled. Brady looked uncomfortable. His hand rested on his gun belt, but his eyes kept sliding away from Jack's face, looking at the ground, the sky, anywhere else. He was a good man, caught in a bad situation. Jack had known him for 15 years, had shot his horses, had stood beside him at town meetings back when Jack still attended such things. Brady tried to do right, but trying was not always enough. Clayton Ward looked like a man who had just won something. He strode forward through the snow, not hurrying but not hesitating either, confident, entitled, sure of his welcome because he had never been refused anything in his entire life. He wore a black wool coat that probably cost more than Jack's entire forge, black leather gloves, a black hat with a silver band that matched the buckle at his waist. His boots were polished to a mirror shine despite the mud and snow. His face was composed, pleasant even, like he was out for an evening stroll and had just happened to stop by. Jack said nothing, just stood there on the porch with his hands loose at his sides, watching, waiting. "Jack Reeves," Clayton's voice cut through the wind, smooth and controlled, the voice of a man used to boardrooms and negotiations and getting exactly what he wanted. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Jack still said nothing. His jaw worked. His hands stayed loose. His eyes stayed on Clayton's face. Sheriff Brady cleared his throat, stepped forward. "Jack, we need to talk. Mr. Ward here says his niece ran off after some discipline. Says he's her legal guardian, according to territorial law." "Legal," Jack repeated. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. Clayton stepped forward, brushing snow from his coat with careful, precise movements. Each gesture was measured, controlled, like he was performing for an audience. Now, Jack, I know we've had our differences in the past, but this is family business. Sarah is a troubled girl, headstrong, like her mother was. Sometimes children need correction, structure, discipline. He pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. I have the guardianship documents right here, legal and proper, signed by Territorial Judge Arthur Miller himself 2 weeks after Thomas and Rose died. He held it out. Sheriff Brady took it, squinting at the writing in the lamplight. His face went tight, jaw clenching, but he nodded slowly. "Papers look in order," Brady said quietly. "Guardian appointment, filed with the territorial clerk. All signed and notarized proper." Jack watched Clayton's eyes. They flicked past him to the closed door, to the window where lamplight showed through the shutters. Something hungry moved behind that polished surface, something that had nothing to do with family obligation and everything to do with property and control, and the kind of greed that wore nice clothes and smiled while it destroyed people. "Let me see the girl first," Jack said. His voice came out flat, cold. "Let me hear her say she wants to go back." Clayton's smile thinned, just a fraction, just enough to show what lived underneath. "She's 9 years old, Jack, a child. Children don't know what they want. That's why the law appoints guardians. That's why God gave them parents and uncles to make decisions for them." He took another step closer. Jack could smell his cologne now, expensive and sharp, out of place in the snow and forge smoke and mountain cold. The kind of scent that cost more per ounce than most families spent on food for a month. "That deed paper she's carrying," Clayton continued, his voice dropping lower, more intimate, like he was sharing a secret. "That belongs to me, too, as her legal guardian. The Bennett Ranch, all 5,000 acres, water rights included. Everything Thomas built over 20 years, all very proper and legal, of course. The law is quite clear on guardianship rights over minor children's property." He paused. Let that sink in. Let Jack understand exactly what this was about. Then he smiled again, that pleasant, reasonable smile that never touched his eyes. "So I'll ask polite-like," Clayton said softly. "Bring me my niece. We'll forget this unpleasantness. You can go back to your forge and your—" He glanced at the workshop, at the whiskey bottle visible through the window. "Your evening routine. I'll handle my family affairs. Simple as that. No trouble, no complications, just a misunderstanding between neighbors." Behind Jack, through the closed door, he heard it. Sarah's voice, barely a whisper, but clear enough in the moment of silence between wind gusts. "Please don't make me go back." 4 words, spoken by a 9-year-old girl with welts on her back and terror in her voice. Jack Reeves had spent 8 years not caring about anything, not feeling anything, not being responsible for anything except hammering metal and collecting payment and drinking enough to sleep without dreams. He had told himself he was done caring, done trying, done being responsible for anyone's life when he had failed so completely at protecting the ones that mattered most. 8 years of existing without living, of safety through isolation, of surviving by refusing to care whether he survived or not. But that voice, that small, broken, desperate voice asking him, "Please." Something in Jack's chest cracked wider. Something that had been frozen solid for 2,847 days started to thaw, and it hurt worse than anything he had felt since the fire. Caring hurt. Responsibility hurt. Being needed hurt. But the alternative, sending that child back to the man who had beaten her bloody, that would hurt worse. Jack looked at Clayton Ward, really looked at him, saw past the expensive clothes and the polished manners to what lived underneath, saw the calculation in his eyes, the complete absence of anything resembling love or mercy or basic human decency, saw a man who viewed a 9-year-old orphan as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed on his way to 5,000 acres of prime grazing land. Then Jack looked at Sheriff Brady, who would not meet his eyes, who stood there with the weight of duty crushing down on decent intentions. Then Jack looked down at his own hands, scarred from forge work, thick with calluses. shaking slightly from cold or anger or the simple terror of choosing to care again after so long. He thought about 3 graves on a hillside. He thought about the smell of smoke and the sound of his wife screaming and the feeling of his son's small body going still in his arms. He thought about 2,847 days of hammering metal because it was the only thing that did not require him to feel anything at all. He thought about the letter from the bank and the house he was going to lose in 3 days, and how none of that mattered if he let another child suffer when he could prevent it. Then he thought about Tom Bennett standing up at his wedding 15 years ago. Tom who had been his friend. Tom who had never stopped treating him like a man even after the fire. Tom who was dead now under circumstances that sounded less like accident and more like murder with every passing second. Jack made his choice. "No," he said. The word hung in the frozen air between them. Simple, final, absolute. Clayton's smile vanished. All pretense of pleasantness dropped away like a mask falling, and what was left looked like something you would find under a rock. "I'm sorry?" "I said no." Jack's voice came out steady now, stronger. "She's not going anywhere with you tonight. You can't keep her. Those papers are legal. I'm her guardian under territorial law." "Then get a judge to come tell me that. A real one, not one you bought 2 weeks after Tom died." Clayton's face went hard. His hand moved toward his coat pocket. Jack's hand moved toward his belt, toward the knife he kept there for cutting leather. Both men froze. Sheriff Brady stepped between them. "Stop," Brady said quietly. "Both of you. Just stop." He looked at Jack. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Am I?" "The law is the law, Jack. Those papers give Clayton guardianship. I don't like it any more than you do, but I can't just ignore legal documents because we don't like the man holding them." Jack held Brady's eyes, saw the conflict there, saw the decent man trapped inside an impossible situation. "The law says a man can beat a child bloody and call it discipline. The law says a wheel just comes off a wagon on a straight maintained road and kills 2 good people. The law says convenient things for convenient people, Cole. It doesn't make them right." Brady's jaw clenched. He looked away, looked back. "I'll give you 10 days. That's all I can do under the custody dispute provisions. 10 days to get a lawyer if you can afford one. 10 days to find some legal grounds to challenge the guardianship. But on day 11, Jack, if you still have that girl, I'll have to come back here with deputies and arrest you for kidnapping and custodial interference. That's not a threat. That's a promise. That's my job." Clayton wheeled on him. 10 days? You're giving him 10 days to harbor a runaway? What kind of law enforcement is that? "The kind that follows territorial statute on temporary custody disputes," Brady said flatly. "Section 42, paragraph 6. Either party can request a 10-day review period before enforcement of guardianship transfer. It's in the books. Look it up." He mounted his horse before Clayton could argue further. Sat there looking down at Jack with something like regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry, but that's all you get. After that, I have to do my duty." Clayton stood there for a long moment, snow gathering on his shoulders, that silver buckle catching the lamplight and throwing it back in sharp reflections. When he spoke, his voice had gone cold and flat, all pretense of civility abandoned. "You just made a very serious mistake, Reeves, a costly one. In 10 days I'll have that girl back. And you? You'll lose everything. Your forge, your house, your freedom, all because you couldn't mind your own business and let a man handle his family affairs." He walked back to his horse with the same careful, controlled movements, like even his anger was calculated and precise, mounted up, gathered his reins, looked down at Jack one last time. "Tom Bennett thought he could stand against me, too," Clayton said quietly. The words carried across the snow, soft and deadly. "Thought he could refuse to sell his water rights. Thought he could file complaints about my business practices. Thought he was untouchable because he had friends in town." He paused. Look where it got him. The implication hung in the air like poison. Then Clayton Ward turned his horse and rode off into the swirling snow, the lamplight swinging wild in his hand, the darkness swallowing him whole, like he had never been there at all. Jack stood on the porch until he could no longer hear the hoofbeats, until the wind had covered their tracks, until his hands stopped shaking and his breathing came back to something approaching normal. The cold had worked its way through his coat, through his shirt, into his bones. His fingers were numb. His face felt frozen. He was alive in a way he had not been alive for 8 years. Inside, Sarah had not moved from the workbench where he had left her. She sat there with her small hands folded in her lap, looking smaller than any 9-year-old should ever have to look. Her good eye tracked him as he came through the door and shut it carefully behind him. "You're really not going to give me back?" she asked. Her voice shook. "No." "He'll take your house. He owns the bank." "I know." "He'll put you in jail." "Maybe." "He'll hurt you. He hurts everyone who stands against him." Jack walked to the stove, poured water from the kettle into a tin basin, found the cleanest cloth he owned, which was not very clean, came back to where Sarah sat. He moved slowly, carefully, letting her see his hands, letting her understand he was not a threat. "Can I clean those cuts?" he asked quietly. She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because she nodded. Jack worked in silence. He was not gentle because he did not know how to be gentle anymore, but he was careful. Washed away the dried blood from the welts on her back. Applied salve from a jar he kept for rope burns and forge injuries. The cuts were bad, worse than he had thought. Some of them had gone infected, angry red around the edges, weeping pus. She would need proper medical attention from Doc Stone, but that would have to wait until morning. Right now, this was the best he could do. Sarah flinched every time he touched her, every single time, like her body expected pain from every human contact. But she did not pull away, did not run, just sat there, trembling, and letting him work. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. Her voice was small, uncertain, like she genuinely could not understand why anyone would choose this. Jack paused, cloth in hand. For the first time in 8 years, he let himself look directly at another human being. Really look. See them as a person instead of a transaction or a reminder of everything he had lost. "Because someone should have helped me once," he said quietly. The words came out rough, scraped raw. "And they didn't. And people died because of it." Sarah's good eye filled with tears, not from pain, from something else. Something that looked like hope, which was somehow worse. "Papa said you were the man who keeps promises," she whispered. "He told me before he died. Told me if anything ever happened, if Uncle Clayton ever tried to take the ranch, I should find Jack Reeves." She reached into her dress pocket with shaking fingers, pulled out the crumpled paper she had been clutching when she collapsed on his doorstep, smoothed it out on the workbench with careful movements. It was not a deed. It was a letter, written in a shaking hand, ink smudged in places, dated 3 weeks before Tom Bennett died. Jack took it. Read it in the lamplight while his hand started shaking again for reasons that had nothing to do with cold. "Jack, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I know we haven't spoken much these past years since you lost Martha and young Thomas. I know you blame yourself for what happened. I know you've shut yourself away from everyone who cares about you. But I'm writing to you now as a friend, as a man you once stood up for at my wedding, as someone who needs to ask the hardest thing I've ever asked anyone. Protect my Sarah. Clayton has been coming around more lately, asking questions about the ranch, about what would happen if Rose and I both died, about whether we have a will, whether Sarah has any other family besides him. He thinks I don't notice, but I do. I notice everything where my daughter is concerned. He wants the water rights, Jack. The creek that runs through Section 12 never goes dry, not in drought, not in winter, not ever. Every rancher within 50 miles would pay premium prices for access to that water. Clayton knows it. He's been buying up the surrounding land for 2 years now. The Bennett Ranch is the last piece he needs to control the entire valley. And I won't sell. I told him no 6 months ago. Told him again 3 months ago. Last week he stopped asking and started making comments about accidents and how fragile life is and how quickly things can change. Rose doesn't sleep anymore. She hears things at night, sees shadows where there shouldn't be any. We're both scared, Jack. Not for ourselves, for Sarah. If you're reading this, it means the thing we feared has happened. It means Clayton found a way. And it means Sarah needs you now more than she's ever needed anyone. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you're not the right man for this. You're thinking you failed your own family, so how could you possibly protect mine? You're thinking 8 years of grief and guilt and whiskey have left you broken beyond repair. Maybe they have. But Jack, you saved my life once, 10 years back. The mine collapse at Silver Creek. Everyone else had given up on me, said I was already dead, said the shaft was too unstable to risk more lives. But you went in anyway. You found me under 2 tons of fallen timber, carried me out on your back with your own ribs broken and blood running down your face. Carried me 5 miles to the doctor because your horse had bolted and mine was dead. You wouldn't take payment, wouldn't take thanks, just disappeared before I could even get your name from someone else in town. That's who you are, Jack. Not the broken man drinking himself to death in a forge. The man who saves people even when he doesn't save himself. There's a will hidden in my saddle, the old one I keep in the barn, not the one I use for every day. It's tucked in the lining beneath the seat. Names you as Sarah's legal guardian if anything happens to Rose and me. I had my lawyer draw it up proper, file it with the territorial clerk's office. It's legal and binding. Clayton doesn't know about it. Nobody does except my lawyer, and he's sworn to secrecy. When the time comes, that will is your weapon. Use it. I'm asking you to do the hardest thing a man can do. I'm asking you to care again when caring cost you everything. I'm asking you to protect a child who isn't yours, to stand against a powerful man, to risk everything you have left for someone else's daughter. I'm asking because you're the only man I trust, not because you're perfect, God knows you're not, but because you know what it means to lose everything and still choose to be good. Because when it mattered most, when everyone else walked away, you walked into a collapsing mine to save a man you barely knew. That's the kind of man I need for Sarah. Please, Jack, save her the way you saved me. Keep her safe until she's old enough to claim what's rightfully hers. Teach her to be strong. Teach her that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible. And maybe, if God is merciful, saving her will save you too. Your friend, Thomas Bennett. Postscript. The lawyer's name is Henry Whitmore in Colorado Springs. He has a copy of the will and instructions to contact you if anything happens to us. If he doesn't contact you within a week of our deaths, assume Clayton got to him. Trust no one else. Jack read the letter 3 times before he could make his voice work. His throat had closed up, his eyes burned, the paper shook in his hands. Your papa wrote this? Sarah nodded. 3 weeks before the wagon went off the road. He hid it in his coat pocket, told me where to find it if anything happened, told me to run to you if Uncle Clayton ever tried to take me away. Told me you were the only one who couldn't be bought because you don't care about money anymore. She looked up at him with that one good eye, bruised and swollen, but still seeing clearly. He said you were the man who keeps promises, even when they hurt, especially when they hurt. Jack set the letter down carefully on the workbench. His chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped iron bands around his ribs and was slowly, methodically tightening them. For 8 years he had told himself he was done caring, done trying, done being responsible for anyone's life when he had failed so spectacularly at protecting the ones who mattered most. Now, here was a dead man's letter asking him to try again, asking him to be the person he had been before the fire, before the whiskey, before 2,847 days of existing without living. There's a will, Jack said slowly, trying to make sense of it. In your father's old saddle, in the barn at your ranch." "I couldn't get to it," Sarah said. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "When Uncle Clayton came after Mama and Papa died, he locked everything up, said it was all his property now, said I wasn't allowed in the barn or the house or anywhere without his permission. I tried to sneak in once." She touched her swollen eye gently. "That's when he gave me this. Said if I tried again, he'd do worse." Jack stood, walked to the window, looked out at the snow that was falling harder now, building up in thick drifts against the fence line, covering the world in white, making everything clean and new on the surface, while darkness lived underneath. 10 days. He had 10 days to get that will, 10 days to prove it was legitimate, 10 days to find a lawyer who would stand against Clayton Ward and his money and his power and his half-ownership of everyone who mattered in territorial government. 10 days to protect a girl he barely knew, to honor a promise from a dead man, to become someone other than the broken thing he had been for so long. It was impossible. But then again, so was carrying a man with a broken back 5 miles through mountain wilderness. So was building half a town with nothing but a forge and determination. So was surviving 8 years with a hole in your chest where your family used to be, and no good reason to keep breathing except that your body apparently did not care whether you wanted to or not. Jack turned back to Sarah. She was watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, waiting, hoping, trusting in a way that absolutely terrified him, because what if he failed again? What if his drinking and his grief and his guilt made him too slow, too stupid, too broken to save her the way he had been too broken to save his own family? "I need you to understand something," Jack said. The words came hard, scraped raw from a place he had not accessed in years. "I'm not a good man, Sarah. I let my wife and son die because I was drunk and stupid and too slow to think clearly. I've spent 8 years doing nothing but trying to forget that I'm still alive when they're not. I don't know how to take care of a child. I barely know how to take care of myself. I don't know how to fight men like your uncle who have money and lawyers and judges in their pockets. I don't even know if I can keep myself sober long enough to figure any of this out." He stopped, swallowed hard, made himself say the rest. "I might fail you. I probably will fail you. And if I do, if something happens to you because I wasn't good enough or fast enough or smart enough, I won't survive it. I can't lose someone else. I just can't." Sarah slid off the workbench. Her bare feet made no sound on the wooden floor. She crossed the space between them slowly, like she was approaching a wounded animal. Then she did something Jack had not expected. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and cold and trembling, but they held on. Wrapped around his scarred, calloused palm and squeezed with surprising strength. "Papa knew all that," Sarah said quietly. "He knew you were broken. He knew you blamed yourself. He knew about the drinking and the loneliness and all of it. He still chose you." "Why?" Sarah looked up at him. "Because you keep your promises, even when they hurt, even when they cost you everything. You went into that mine when everyone else said it was suicide. You stayed after everyone else left. You saved him when saving him almost killed you." She squeezed his hand tighter. "That's who you are, Mr. Reeves. Not the man who couldn't save his family, the man who saves people anyway." Jack stared down at this 9-year-old child who had been beaten and orphaned and terrified, and was somehow still standing here trying to convince him he was worth believing in. Something in his chest cracked all the way open. Something that had been frozen solid for 2,847 days split apart and started bleeding and hurting and feeling again. It was agony, and it was also somehow the first real thing he had felt since the fire. "All right," Jack heard himself say. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere he thought had died completely. "We'll get that will. We'll stand against your uncle. We'll fight this thing with everything we have. And maybe, if we're lucky, and if God hasn't completely given up on me, we'll win." He paused, made himself be honest. "But Sarah, if we do this, you need to know the odds. Clayton Ward owns this town. He owns the bank, the lumber mill, half the businesses on Main Street. He probably owns Judge Miller, who signed those guardianship papers. He has money and connections, and the kind of power that crushes people who stand against him. The only thing I have is a forge and $12 and a letter from your dead father. And me, Sarah said. You have me. Jack looked at her. You're 9 years old. I'm a witness. I can tell people what he did, show them my back, tell them about Mama and Papa's wagon and how the wheel couldn't have just come loose on that road. Her voice strengthened. I'm not helpless, Mr. Reeves. Papa taught me to ride and shoot and think. I can help. You're a child. Children shouldn't have to fight. But sometimes they do. Sarah's jaw set in a way that reminded Jack painfully of Tom Bennett, stubborn, determined, unwilling to back down even when backing down was the smart choice. Papa said you saved him because you couldn't walk away when someone needed help. Well, I need help. And you can't walk away either. Not really. That's not who you are. She was right, and they both knew it. Jack squeezed her hand gently, then let go. Walked to the stove. Put more wood in, checked that the door was barred and the windows were latched. Made sure the forge was banked properly. Did all the small practical things that gave his hands something to do while his mind tried to process what he had just agreed to. 10 days to save a child. 10 days to stand against a man who murdered his own brother for water rights. 10 days to become someone he had not been in 8 years. You can sleep in the back room, Jack said. It's small, but it's warm. I'll bed down out here by the forge. You don't have to do that. Yes, I do. He looked at her. You've been hurt enough, Sarah. You need to feel safe. That means your own space with a door you can lock from the inside. No arguments. Sarah nodded slowly. Thank you. Jack could not answer that, just nodded back and showed her to the small room at the rear of the workshop where he used to store lumber. It had a cot, a blanket, a lamp, not much. But it was clean, and it was private, and it was the best he could offer. There's water in the pitcher, he said. Chamber pot under the cot. I'll make breakfast in the morning. We'll figure out the rest after that. Sarah climbed onto the cot, pulled the blanket up to her chin, looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. Mr. Reeves? Yes? I'm glad Papa chose you. Jack had no answer to that either. He just stepped back, pulled the door mostly closed to give her privacy, and returned to the main workshop. He sat on the bench by the cooling forge and looked at Tom Bennett's letter. Read it again by lamplight. Tried to understand how he had gone from planning his own slow dissolution to being responsible for a 9-year-old's life in the span of a single evening. Outside, the snow kept falling, the wind kept howling, and somewhere in Sage Creek, Clayton Ward was making plans to crush Jack Reeves and take back what he considered his property. But right now, in this moment, sitting in the warm glow of the dying coals, with the sound of Sarah's breathing coming soft and steady from the back room, Jack felt something he had not felt in 2,847 days. Purpose. It terrified him more than anything Clayton could threaten, because purpose meant responsibility. Responsibility meant caring, and caring meant he could fail again, lose again, watch another innocent person die because he was not good enough or fast enough or strong enough to save them. But the alternative was sending Sarah back to a man who beat her bloody and called it discipline. Back to a man who had probably murdered her parents for land and water rights. Back to more suffering and eventual death and a grave on a hillside next to Tom and Rose Bennett. Jack could not do that. Even if it cost him everything, even if it killed him, he had made Tom Bennett a promise, whether he knew it 8 years ago or not. Had made it when he carried Tom out of that collapsed mine. Had made it when he stood up at Tom's wedding. Had made it every time he shod Tom's horses and listened to him talk about his daughter Sarah and how she was growing up smart and strong and brave. Some promises you made with words, others you made with actions. And Jack Reeves, broken as he was, drunk as he had been, lost as he felt, was still a man who kept his promises, even when they hurt, especially when they hurt. He stood, walked to the door, looked out at the snow-covered yard. The 10 days had started, and somewhere between now and when they ended, Jack would have to become someone worth trusting again, or die trying. Morning came gray and cold. Jack woke on the bench where he had finally dozed off around 3 in the morning, his back stiff, his neck aching, his mouth tasting like old metal. For a moment he forgot where he was, why he was sleeping in his workshop instead of the empty house up the hill. Then he heard movement from the back room and remembered everything. Sarah. The letter. 10 days. Jack stood slowly, his joints protesting. He was 55 years old and felt 70. The whiskey bottle sat on the workbench where he had left it the night before, still half full. He looked at it for a long moment, reached for it, stopped. Not today. Maybe not ever again, if he wanted to keep the promise he had made to a dead man and a living child. He built up the fire in the stove instead, put water on to boil, found the last of his coffee, the good stuff he saved for special occasions, and made it strong enough to strip paint. The smell filled the workshop, warm and bitter and alive. The door to the back room opened. Sarah emerged, moving carefully, like every step cost her something. She had slept in her dress because she had nothing else. Her hair was still tangled, her face still bruised, but her eyes were clearer than they had been the night before. "Morning," Jack said. "Morning." Her voice came out scratchy. She looked at the coffee pot, then at him. "Is that real coffee?" "Real as it gets in Sage Creek." "Mama never let me have coffee, said it would stunt my growth." Jack poured 2 cups, handed her one. "Your mama was probably right, but I figure after last night, you've earned it." Sarah took the cup in both hands, sipped carefully, made a face. "It's bitter." "Life generally is." She looked at him over the rim of the cup. Something like a smile tried to form on her battered face but did not quite make it. "Papa used to say things like that." They drank in silence for a few minutes. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the sky stayed gray and heavy, promising more to come. Jack could see drifts piled 3 feet high against the fence line, covering the yard in white that looked clean and peaceful if you did not know what lived underneath. "We need to get you some proper clothes," Jack said finally, "and food. And I need to take you to Doc Stone to look at those cuts." Sarah stiffened. "Doc Stone will tell Uncle Clayton. Doc Stone will keep his mouth shut if I ask him to. We served together in the war. He owes me." "Everyone owes Uncle Clayton more." Jack set his cup down. "Not everyone. Not yet." There was a knock at the door. Sarah went pale. Her cup clattered onto the workbench, coffee splashing. She backed toward the wall, eyes wide, breathing fast. "Easy," Jack said quietly. "Stay here." He moved to the door, hand on the latch. Through the gap in the shutters he could see a single figure, smaller than Clayton, wearing a long coat and carrying a black medical bag. Doc Elijah Stone. Jack opened the door. Doc stepped inside quickly, shaking snow from his coat. He was 62, gray-haired and gray-bearded, with the kind of face that had seen too much suffering to be surprised by anything anymore. He had been a surgeon in the war, same unit as Jack, had cut off more limbs than he could count and saved more lives than anyone had a right to expect. He took one look at Sarah and his jaw tightened. "Sheriff Brady came by my house this morning," Doc said. "Told me you had Tom Bennett's girl here, told me she might need medical attention." He set his bag on the workbench, opened it. "He also told me not to tell anyone else, said it was important." Brady said that? His exact words were, "That girl deserves better than Clayton Ward. Do what you can." Doc pulled out bandages, antiseptic, clean cloth. "So let's see what we're dealing with." Sarah looked at Jack. Jack nodded. She turned slowly, showing her back. Doc Stone had seen everything in 30 years of frontier medicine. Gunshot wounds, knife fights, childbirth gone wrong, diseases that ate people from the inside out. But when he saw the welts on Sarah's back, something in his face went hard and cold. "How long?" he asked quietly. 4 months, Sarah whispered. Since Mama and Papa died. Doc examined her carefully, professionally, his hands gentle despite their size. He cleaned the infected cuts with antiseptic that made Sarah hiss in pain, applied fresh bandages, checked her ribs, her face, her hands. No broken bones, he said finally. But these welts are bad. Some are infected. She needs proper care, warm baths with salt, clean bandages changed daily, and she needs to eat. She's malnourished. I'll make sure she eats. Doc looked at Jack, really looked at him, the way only an old friend could. You know what you're doing here? Standing against Clayton Ward with nothing but good intentions and a letter from a dead man? No, Jack said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. You'll lose your forge, your house, probably your freedom. Probably. And you're doing it for a child you barely know. I'm doing it because someone should have stood up for my family and they didn't. I'm doing it because Tom Bennett asked me to. And I'm doing it because if I don't, I won't be able to look at myself in a mirror ever again. Doc was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed his medical bag and turned to Sarah. Young lady, I want you to know something. Your father was a good man, one of the best I ever knew. And he chose Jack Reeves to protect you for a reason. Jack here might not look like much right now, might have spent the last 8 years drowning in a bottle. But before that he was the kind of man who walked into hell to save people. Still is, apparently. You listen to him, trust him. He'll keep you safe or die trying. Sarah nodded silently. Doc turned back to Jack. I'll do what I can, quietly, but you need to know something. Clayton's already working the town. Telling people you're dangerous, unstable, spreading stories about the fire, about how you were drunk when Martha and Thomas died, making people afraid of you. Let him talk. It's more than talk, Jack. He's got money, power. He's making promises and calling in debts. By tomorrow, half the town will believe you're a threat to that girl, not a protector. Jack felt something cold settle in his gut. How bad? Bad enough that I heard talk at the saloon last night. Talk about men riding out here, making sure you did the right thing and gave Sarah back to her legal guardian. A mob? Not yet, but heading that way if Clayton keeps pushing. Jack walked to the window, looked out at the empty street, the snow-covered buildings, the town he had helped build with his own hands. A town that would turn on him if Clayton Ward wanted it badly enough. How much time do I have? He asked. 2 days, maybe 3. Doc put his hand on Jack's shoulder. You need to move fast. Get that will. Find a lawyer. Make this legal before Clayton makes it violent. After Doc left, Jack stood at the workbench and made himself think. Really think the way he had not done in 8 years. Pushing through the fog of grief and whiskey and isolation to find the man he used to be, the man who planned and strategized and solved problems instead of drowning them. Sarah sat on the bench watching him, waiting. The will is in your father's saddle, Jack said slowly, in the barn at the Bennett Ranch. Uncle Clayton has guards there now. 2 men. They're there all the time. When do they change shifts? Sarah thought about it. Sunset. They trade off. One stays, one goes to town for dinner. For about an hour, there's only 1 man. And the barn? Where exactly is the saddle? Tack room. 3rd hook from the door. It's old, brown leather, worn on the seat. Papa kept it because it was the first one he ever owned. Jack nodded, started forming a plan. It was risky, possibly stupid, but it was all he had. We'll go tonight, he said. During the shift change, 1 guard is better odds than 2. You'll get caught. Maybe, but sitting here doing nothing guarantees we lose. At least this way we're fighting. Sarah stood, walked to the forge, ran her hand over the anvil, the tools, the horseshoe Jack had been working on when she knocked on his door. Papa used to bring me here sometimes. When you were shoeing his horses, I was maybe 5 or 6. You probably don't remember. Jack did remember. A little girl with dark hair and curious eyes, asking questions about everything, touching things she should not touch, until Tom gently pulled her away. You asked me why metal got hot when you hit it, Jack said quietly. Sarah looked up, surprised. You remember that? I told you it was magic. And I said magic wasn't real. She smiled slightly, the first real smile he had seen on her face. Papa laughed, said you'd met your match. The memory hurt worse than Jack expected. Tom laughing, Sarah safe and happy, a world where children asked innocent questions and got playful answers, and nobody beat them bloody for existing. I'm going to get you back to that, Jack said. To being a child who asked questions instead of flinching at shadows. I promise you that. You can't promise that. Watch me. They spent the day preparing. Jack went through his tools, selected what he might need. A small pry bar for locks, wire cutters, a dark coat that would blend with night. He counted his money again. $12. Not enough for a lawyer. Not enough for anything except maybe one more week of food. The letter from the bank still sat on the workbench. $200. 2 days left now. Jack looked at it and felt nothing. The house did not matter anymore. Nothing mattered except keeping Sarah safe and honoring Tom Bennett's trust. Around noon there was another knock. This time it was Elena Vargas, the woman who owned the boarding house on Main Street. She was 30 years old, strong and practical, with the kind of face that had seen hardship and come through it harder. She carried a basket covered with a cloth. Doc Stone said you had a girl here who needed feeding, Elena said without preamble. She did not wait for an invitation, just walked in and set the basket on the workbench. I brought food, real food, not whatever bachelor nonsense you're living on. The basket held bread, still warm, cheese, dried apples, jerky, a jar of preserves, more food than Jack had seen in his kitchen in months. Sarah stared at it like it might disappear. Thank you, Jack said. Don't thank me yet. This is just food. Elena looked at Sarah, her eyes softening. Child, I knew your mama. She was a good woman. Came to town every month, always had a kind word, always paid her debts. You look just like her. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Elena knelt down. I also knew what Clayton Ward is, a snake in a nice suit. And I know what it takes for Jack Reeves to care about anything after 8 years of not caring about himself. So here's what's going to happen. You need clothes, you come to me. You need a safe place, you come to me. You need anything at all, you come to me. Understand? Sarah nodded. Elena stood, turned to Jack. I heard the talk about men coming out here, about Clayton spreading poison through town. You need to know you're not alone in this. There are people who remember Tom Bennett, remember what he stood for. They might not stand up publicly, not against Clayton's money, but they'll help quietly. Why are you helping? Jack asked. Elena's face hardened. Because 5 years ago, Clayton tried to buy my boarding house. When I wouldn't sell, my husband had an accident. Fell off a roof he'd climbed 100 times before. Broke his neck. She paused. Sheriff ruled it accidental. But I found boot prints on that roof that didn't match my husband's boots. And I saw Clayton Ward at the funeral looking satisfied. The pieces were coming together. A pattern of death and accidents, and Clayton Ward benefiting every time. How many others? Jack asked quietly. That I know of. 3 families lost land after convenient accidents in the last 5 years. Tom and Rose Bennett make 5. Probably more I don't know about. Elena looked at him steadily. You're standing against something bigger than one bad man, Jack. You're standing against a system that protects money and power and lets men like Clayton destroy anyone in their way. After Elena left, Jack made Sarah eat. She picked at the food at first, then hunger took over and she ate properly, tearing into the bread and cheese like she had not had a real meal in weeks, which she probably had not. While she ate, Jack went to his house for the first time in days. The empty rooms echoed. Dust covered everything. He found clothes that had belonged to Martha, altered them roughly with a knife and thread to fit Sarah's smaller frame. Found his old gun belt, the one from the war, and checked that the revolver still worked. Found ammunition, counted rounds, 6 bullets. He hoped that would be enough. Hoped he would not need any. Back at the forge, Sarah had finished eating and fallen asleep on the bench, exhausted from fear and pain and the simple act of feeling safe enough to close her eyes. Jack covered her with his coat, watched her sleep for a moment, felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. Then he sat down with Tom's letter and read it again, looking for details he might have missed, looking for anything that might help. The lawyer, Henry Whitmore in Colorado Springs. Tom had mentioned him, said he had a copy of the will and instructions to contact Jack if anything happened. But it had been 4 months since Tom and Rose died. If Whitmore had tried to contact Jack, the letter had never arrived, which meant Clayton had intercepted it, or paid someone to intercept it, or killed Whitmore before he could send it. Jack needed that will. It was the only legal weapon he had. Without it, Clayton's guardianship papers would stand and Sarah would go back to being beaten until she either died or aged enough to sign over the ranch permanently. The sun was setting when Sarah woke. Jack had been sharpening his knife, testing the edge against his thumb. She watched him for a moment before speaking. "You're really going tonight?" "We're going tonight," Jack corrected. "I need you to show me exactly where the saddle is, exactly where the guards stand, everything you remember." "It's too dangerous. Everything worth doing is." They left an hour after full dark. The moon was hidden behind clouds, which was good. Less light meant less chance of being seen. Jack wore his darkest clothes. Sarah wore the altered dress from Martha, dark blue that blended with night. They moved on foot, leading Jack's horse rather than riding it, quieter that way, less visible. The Bennett Ranch lay 15 miles north. They covered the distance in 4 hours, moving carefully, avoiding the main road. Jack's legs ached. His breath came hard in the cold. He was not the man he had been 8 years ago, but he was still capable, still strong enough for this. They stopped a quarter-mile from the ranch house, crouched behind a stand of trees. From here, Jack could see lights in the windows, could see the barn, dark and silent against the snow, could see one figure standing near the barn door, smoking a cigarette. The glow of it marked his position clearly. "That's Stevens," Sarah whispered. "He's mean, but he's lazy. He'll stay by the door where it's warmer, won't patrol." "And the other guard?" "Should be gone by now. He always leaves right at sunset, goes to the saloon in town, comes back around midnight." Jack checked the time on his pocket watch, 10:30. They had 90 minutes before the second guard returned. "You stay here," Jack said. "If anything goes wrong, you run. Don't wait for me. Just run." "No." "Sarah, this isn't negotiable. You need me. I know where the saddle is. I know where Uncle Clayton keeps the keys. You'll waste time searching. We don't have time to waste." She was right, and Jack hated it. But she was right. "Stay close to me," he said. "Stay quiet. If I tell you to run, you run. No arguments." They moved through the darkness like ghosts, circled wide around the barn, approaching from the back where Stevens could not see them. The barn had a rear door, smaller, used for moving hay. Jack tested it carefully. Locked. He pulled out the pry bar, worked it into the gap between door and frame, applied pressure slowly, carefully, trying not to make noise. The wood creaked. The lock held. Jack pushed harder. The lock broke with a sound like a gunshot. Jack froze. Sarah pressed against the wall, barely breathing. They waited. Listening. Footsteps coming around the barn. Stevens investigating the noise. Jack pulled Sarah inside the barn, into darkness that smelled of hay and horses and leather. Found a stall. Pulled her down behind the wooden slats. Put his hand over her mouth, signaling silence. Stevens came through the rear door, lantern held high. The light swept across the barn interior, throwing wild shadows. Jack could see him clearly now, young, maybe 25. Wore a gun belt low on his hip like he thought it made him dangerous. Probably did not know how to use it properly. The light passed over their hiding spot, moved on. Stevens muttered something under his breath about wind and broken latches. Started to turn away. Sarah's foot knocked against a bucket. The sound echoed through the barn like thunder. Stevens spun, hand going to his gun. "Who's there?" Jack moved before he could think about it, rose from behind the stall. Crossed the distance in 4 long strides. hit Stevens hard in the jaw before the young man could draw his weapon. Stevens went down like a sack of grain, lantern flying from his hand, oil spilling across the floor. Jack caught the lantern before it could ignite the spilled oil, set it down carefully, checked Stevens, unconscious but breathing. He would have a hell of a headache when he woke up, but nothing permanent. "Help me tie him," Jack said. They used rope from the tack room. Bound Stevens hand and foot, gagged him with his own bandana, dragged him into an empty stall, and covered him with hay. By the time he woke up or the other guard found him, Jack and Sarah would be long gone. Sarah led Jack to the tack room, third hook from the door, just like she had said. The saddle hung there, old and worn, leather cracked with age and use. Jack lifted it down carefully, ran his hands over the underside of the seat, feeling for the hidden compartment Tom had mentioned. There, a seam in the leather barely visible. Jack worked his knife blade into it. The stitching gave way. Inside, tucked into the lining, was a folded document. Jack pulled it out with shaking hands, unfolded it carefully in the lamplight. Last Will and Testament of Thomas Edward Bennett. The words were formal, legal, written in a lawyer's precise hand. Jack scanned them quickly. There, Section 4, Guardianship of Minor Child. In the event of our deaths, my wife Rose and I hereby appoint Jack Samuel Reeves of Sage Creek, Colorado Territory, as legal guardian of our daughter, Sarah Elizabeth Bennett. We make this appointment trusting in Mr. Reeves' character, integrity, and demonstrated capacity for courage under extreme circumstances. We further direct that all property, assets, and water rights associated with the Bennett Ranch be held in trust for Sarah until she reaches the age of majority at 18 years, with Jack Reeves serving as executor and administrator of said trust. Dated April 12, 1883. Witnessed and notarized by Henry Whitmore, attorney at law, Colorado Springs. Filed with the Territorial Clerk's Office May 1st, 1883. Jack read it twice to make sure he understood. This was real, legal, filed properly. It predated Clayton's guardianship petition by 5 months, which meant Clayton's claim was invalid, meaningless. If they could prove this will was legitimate. "Did you find it?" Sarah whispered. Jack looked at her, saw hope and fear warring in her eyes. "Yes." "Does it say what Papa told me?" "It says, I'm your guardian. It says the ranch is yours. It says Clayton has no claim to any of it." Sarah reached into the inner pocket, pulled out a small leather-bound book no bigger than her hand. The cover was worn, stained with what might have been water or blood. "There's more," she said quietly. "I took this from Papa's desk the night I ran. Didn't know what it was until later." Jack took the book carefully, opened it to the first page. Tom Bennett's handwriting, neat and methodical. April 1881. Clayton asked about water rights again today, third time this month, offered $2,000. When I refused, he said I was being short-sighted. Said men who don't see opportunity often find tragedy instead. Jack flipped through the pages. Entry after entry, dated, detailed, names of other ranchers, conversations, threats dressed up as friendly advice. September 1882. Harrison Ranch burned last night. Sheriff says accidental. I examined the site this morning. Found 3 separate points of origin. Fire doesn't start in 3 places by accident. Clayton bought the land at auction today. Paid half what it's worth. Harrison's widow had no choice but to sell. January 1883. Brake line on McCready's wagon was cut clean. Saw the tool marks myself before sheriff took the evidence. Same threading pattern as surveyor's pliers. Clayton owns the only set in the territory. McCready's son sold the ranch 2 weeks later to Clayton for water rights. The last entry was dated 3 days before Tom died. September 18th, 1883. Clayton came to the house today. Didn't bother with pleasantries. Said I had one last chance to sell. Said if I didn't, he'd make sure Sarah was well cared for. After. The way he said after made my blood run cold. I told Rose tonight, if anything happens to me, it's not an accident. I've written everything down. Every threat, every suspicious death, every pattern I can see. Jack Reeves is the only man I trust with this. God forgive me for putting this burden on him." The journal shook in Jack's hands. This was not just a will. This was evidence. Documented proof spanning 2 years of threats, of pattern, of premeditated murder. "Does it help?" Sarah asked quietly. Jack looked at her, at this child whose father had spent his last months documenting his own death because he knew it was coming and wanted justice for his daughter. "Yes," Jack said. His voice came out rough. "It helps more than you know." Sarah's face crumpled. She started crying, not from sadness but from relief so powerful it overwhelmed her. Jack knelt down, let her collapse against him, held her while she sobbed into his coat and shook with 8 years' worth of terror finally breaking loose. "We're going to be okay," he said quietly. "We have what we need." Outside, horse hooves crunched through snow. The second guard. Back early. Jack moved fast, pulled Sarah to her feet. "Back door, now!" They ran through the barn, Jack clutching the will in one hand and Sarah's arm in the other, hit the rear door at full speed, burst out into the night air. Behind them, voices, shouting. The second guard had found Stevens. "Stop, thief! Someone's in the barn!" Gunshots. 2 of them. Close enough that Jack heard the bullets whine past. They reached the trees where Jack had left his horse. He lifted Sarah into the saddle, swung up behind her, kicked the horse into a gallop without waiting to see if anyone was following. They rode hard for an hour, then another. The horse was blowing hard, foaming at the mouth, but Jack did not slow down until they were back in Sage Creek, back at the forge, back behind a locked door, with the will safe in Jack's coat pocket. Sarah slid off the horse and collapsed onto the bench. Jack's hands were shaking so hard he could barely unsaddle the horse. Adrenaline and fear and the simple fact that he had not done anything like that in 8 years. "We did it," Sarah said, wonder in her voice. "We actually did it." "We got the will," Jack agreed. "Now we have to make sure it holds up." He pulled out the document again, studied it in the lamplight. The signatures looked real. The notary seal looked official. But Clayton had money. Money bought lawyers who could challenge anything. Money bought judges who would rule however they were told to rule. Jack needed help, real help, from someone who understood territorial law and could not be bought. There was a knock at the door. Jack's hand went to his gun. Sarah pressed against the wall. "Jack Reeves." The voice from outside was cultured, educated, unfamiliar. "My name is Henry Whitmore. I'm an attorney from Colorado Springs. I believe we need to talk about Tom Bennett's will." Jack opened the door slowly, gun in hand. The man outside was 60 years old, gray-haired, wearing a suit that had seen better days but was still respectable. He carried a leather satchel and wore spectacles that caught the lamplight. His face was lined with age and what looked like genuine concern. "How do I know you're who you say you are?" Jack asked. "You don't. But I can tell you that Tom Bennett came to my office 2 years ago with a very specific request. He wanted to create a will that would protect his daughter from his brother Clayton if anything happened to him and his wife. He was very clear that the will should be filed quietly, secretly, so Clayton would not know about it until after Tom's death." Whitmore paused. "He also told me about a man named Jack Reeves who once carried him 5 miles out of a collapsed mine. Said that man was the only person he trusted with his daughter's life." Jack lowered the gun slightly. "Why didn't you contact me when Tom died?" "I tried. I sent 3 letters. None were answered. Then I received a visit from 2 men who made it very clear that if I pursued the matter further, I would have an accident similar to the one that killed the Bennetts." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "I'm ashamed to say I was frightened enough to back down. For 4 months, I told myself it was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. Then tonight, I heard that you had taken Sarah in, that you were standing against Clayton Ward with nothing but courage and a dead man's trust. And I realized I was a coward." He looked at Jack steadily. "So I'm here now. Late, but here. And I'm offering my services as an attorney free of charge to make sure Tom Bennett's will stands up in court and Sarah Bennett gets what's rightfully hers." Jack studied him, looked for deception, found only tired honesty and what might have been redemption. "All right," Jack said. "Come in." They sat at the workbench, the three of them. Whitmore examined the will carefully, nodded slowly. "This is solid, properly executed, filed correctly. It supersedes any guardianship petition Clayton made after Tom's death." He looked at Jack. "But we have a problem. Clayton has Judge Miller in his pocket. If we go through normal channels, Miller will find some technicality to invalidate this will. We need to go higher. We need to petition the territorial governor." "How long does that take?" "Normally, 2 months. But there's an emergency provision for cases involving child welfare. If we can prove imminent danger, we can get a ruling in days instead of months." "Sarah's back is proof enough," Jack said grimly. Whitmore pulled out paper and a pen. "Then we start writing. Tonight. I'll draft the petition. You'll both need to give statements. We'll need Doc Stone's medical report. We'll need to file in Colorado Springs by tomorrow night. Tomorrow night is impossible. That's 80 miles. It's possible if we ride through the night. I brought 2 horses. We leave at dawn, ride hard, file before the clerk's office closes." Whitmore looked at him seriously. "This is our one chance, Jack. Clayton will move to stop us once he realizes what we're doing. We have maybe 24 hours before he brings everything down on our heads." Jack looked at Sarah. She looked back at him with absolute trust. "Then we'd better start writing," Jack said. They worked through the night. Whitmore drafted legal documents in precise language. Jack and Sarah gave their statements, recounting everything: the beating, the threats, the suspicious wagon accident, the pattern of deaths. Doc Stone arrived around midnight with his medical report, detailed and damning. By dawn, they had a case. A real case. Solid enough to stand up in territorial court if they could just get it filed before Clayton shut them down. Jack saddled his horse. Whitmore mounted his. Sarah stood in the doorway of the forge, looking small and afraid. "You'll be safe here," Jack said. "Elena is coming to stay with you. Don't answer the door for anyone else." "What if Uncle Clayton comes?" "Then Elena has a shotgun and permission to use it." He wanted to say more, wanted to promise her that everything would be okay, that he would come back, that they would win this. But he had learned not to make promises he might not be able to keep. Instead, he just put his hand on her shoulder. "Trust me." "I do," Sarah said quietly. Jack and Whitmore rode out as the sun was rising, 80 miles to Colorado Springs. 16 hours if they rode hard and the weather held. Jack's back already ached. His legs protested. He was too old for this, but he rode anyway. Behind them, Sage Creek was waking up, people emerging from houses, shops opening, life going on like always. None of them knowing that in a forge at the edge of town, a 9-year-old girl was waiting to see if the legal system would protect her or feed her back to the man who beat her bloody. Jack kicked his horse into a faster pace. They had 24 hours. The race had begun. The ride to Colorado Springs took 18 hours. Jack and Henry Whitmore pushed their horses hard through mountain passes still thick with snow, through valleys where the wind cut like knives, through darkness so complete that they had to trust the horses to find the trail. Jack's back screamed. His hands went numb on the reins. His lungs burned with cold air. But they rode. Around midnight, they stopped to rest the horses for 1 hour. Built a small fire in the shelter of some rocks, ate jerky that tasted like leather, drank coffee that had gone cold in their canteens. "Tell me about the mine collapse," Whitmore said. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "The one where you saved Tom Bennett." Jack stared into the fire. He had not talked about that day in 10 years, had tried not to think about it. But now, in the darkness, with exhaustion making him honest, the words came. "Silver Creek Mine, August 1873. I was working as a foreman there before I started the forge. Tom was one of the miners, new to the territory, didn't know the mountain yet. There was a collapse in Shaft 3. Support beams gave way. 12 men trapped." He paused, remembered. The owner said it was too dangerous to go back in. Said we'd already lost 12 men and he wouldn't lose more. Said we should seal the shaft and move on. But I could hear them down there. Could hear them screaming. So you went in. I went in. Against orders. Against common sense. Found Tom under 2 tons of timber, both legs broken, bleeding from his head. He was conscious. Kept saying he didn't want to die in the dark. Kept asking me to tell his wife Rose that he loved her. Jack's hands clenched. It took 3 hours to dig him out. 3 hours with the shaft groaning and settling around us, knowing any second the whole thing could come down and bury us both. But I got him out. Carried him on my back 5 miles because the horses had bolted, and the owner sure as hell wasn't sending a wagon for a man who'd defied his orders. Tom lived. I got fired. Seemed like a fair trade at the time. Whitmore was quiet for a long moment. That's why he trusted you with Sarah. Not because you're perfect. Because when it mattered, you chose to walk into hell rather than leave a man behind. Jack looked at him. And what about you? Tom trusted you with his will. You disappeared for 4 months when Clayton's men threatened you. Why come back now? Whitmore's face tightened. Because I've spent those 4 months watching that little girl suffer and telling myself I had good reasons for staying quiet, telling myself I was being smart, practical, safe. He threw a stick into the fire. Then I heard you'd taken her in, heard you were standing against Clayton with nothing but a forge and $12. And I realized you were doing what I should have done from the start. So here I am, late, ashamed, but here. Late is better than never. Is it? Tom Bennett's been dead for 4 months. Sarah's been beaten for 4 months. How many more days would I have waited if you hadn't forced my hand? Jack had no answer to that. Just watched the fire burn and tried not to think about what was happening back in Sage Creek. About Sarah alone in the forge with Elena. About whether Clayton had figured out what they were doing yet. About what he would do when he did. They rode out again before dawn, reached Colorado Springs as the sun was setting, 18 hours after they had left Sage Creek. The horses were exhausted. Jack was barely conscious in the saddle, but they had made it. The territorial clerk's office was closing. Whitmore pounded on the door until a harried-looking clerk opened it, already saying they were closed. Come back tomorrow. This is an emergency petition regarding child welfare, Whitmore said. His voice had gone hard, authoritative, the voice of a man who knew the law and how to wield it. Under Territorial Statute Section 17, you're required to accept emergency filings until 6 o'clock. It's 5:45. The clerk looked at Jack, saw his exhausted face, his desperate eyes, saw whatever it was that made him step aside. 15 minutes, the clerk said. That's all you get. Whitmore filed everything. The will, the medical reports, the statements, the petition for emergency review. The clerk stamped each document, filed them properly, gave Whitmore receipts proving everything had been submitted legally and on time. When will we hear back? Whitmore asked. Emergency petitions get reviewed within 72 hours. You'll receive notification by telegraph. 3 days, Jack said once they were outside. We have to hold Sarah safe for 3 more days. 7 days left on Sheriff Brady's deadline, Whitmore said. If the ruling comes through in time, you're legal. If it doesn't, Clayton can have you arrested for kidnapping. They found a boarding house, paid for 2 rooms with the last of Jack's money. Jack collapsed onto the bed without even removing his boots, slept for 12 hours straight, dreamless and exhausted. When he woke, there was a telegram under his door. He opened it with shaking hands. Clayton knows. Came to Forge with 10 men. Elena held them off with shotgun. Sarah safe but scared. Hurry. Doc Stone. Jack was on his horse within 15 minutes. Whitmore tried to argue that they should wait for the ruling, that going back now might be walking into a trap. Jack did not care. Sarah was in danger. That was all that mattered. The ride back took 16 hours. Jack pushed his horse harder than he should have, harder than was safe. The animal was loyal and strong and gave everything it had. By the time they reached Sage Creek, it was barely standing. Jack left it at the livery with orders to give it the best care available. Paid with his pocket watch, the only thing of value he had left. Then he walked to the forge through streets that felt hostile in ways they never had before. People watched him pass, some with sympathy, most with suspicion. Clayton had done his work well. The forge was intact. Elena sat on the porch with a shotgun across her lap, looking tired but determined. Sarah was inside, visible through the window, pacing like a caged animal. "About time," Elena said. "That man's been here twice. Brought more men each time. Keeps saying he's going to have the sheriff remove Sarah by force if you don't bring her out voluntarily." Jack walked inside. Sarah ran to him, threw her arms around his waist, held on like she was drowning. "I thought you weren't coming back," she whispered. "I promised I would." People break promises. I don't. Whitmore arrived an hour later with news. The territorial governor's office had received their petition, had flagged it as priority due to the medical evidence. A ruling would come within 48 hours, maybe sooner. 2 more days, Jack said. "We hold for 2 more days." But Clayton Ward was done waiting. The mob came at sunset. Jack saw them from the window. 20 men, maybe more, carrying torches and rifles, led by Clayton Ward in his black coat with his silver buckle catching the firelight. Behind him, Sheriff Brady, looking sick but present. Behind them, half the town, drawn by anger or fear or simple curiosity about what would happen next. Jack checked his revolver. 6 bullets. Not nearly enough if this went bad. "Stay in the back room," he told Sarah. "No matter what happens, you stay there. Understand?" "Jack, there's too many of them." "I know." He looked at Elena. "Get her out if I can't." Elena nodded grimly, chambered around in her shotgun. Jack stepped onto the porch. The crowd stopped 30 feet away, torches throwing wild shadows. Clayton stood at the front, surrounded by his hired men. Sheriff Brady stood to one side, hand on his gun, face troubled. "Jack Reeves!" Clayton called out. His voice carried across the yard, confident and controlled. "Your time is up. The law says that girl belongs to me. Sheriff Brady here has a warrant for your arrest if you don't surrender her immediately." Jack said nothing. Just stood there with his hands loose at his sides. Clayton smiled. "You've made quite a spectacle of yourself. Kidnapping a child? Assaulting my employee? Stealing documents from my property? Breaking and entering? The charges are serious, Jack. You're looking at 5 years in territorial prison, maybe more." "She's not your property," Jack said quietly. "She's a human being, and she's not going back to being beaten. I have legal guardianship, signed by a judge. That makes her my responsibility. You have fraudulent papers, signed by a corrupt judge." Jack pulled the will from his coat, held it up where everyone could see. "This is Tom Bennett's real will, filed legally, dated 5 months before your guardianship petition. It names me as Sarah's guardian. It puts the ranch in trust for her. Your claim is void," the crowd murmured. Clayton's smile flickered. "That's a forgery," Clayton said. "Obviously forged by you or by some desperate lawyer you convinced to help you. It's filed with the territorial clerk, notarized properly, every signature verified. We've petitioned the governor for emergency review. You'll have your answer in 2 days." 2 days? Clayton laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Sheriff Brady's deadline was 10 days. That ended yesterday. As of this moment, you are in violation of a court order. You're a criminal. Sheriff, arrest this man. Brady stepped forward reluctantly. "Jack, I don't want to do this, but the law is clear. Your 10 days are up. If you don't surrender Sarah and come peacefully, I have to use force." "The will changes things, Cole." "Does it?" Clayton's right. Could be a forgery, could be real. But it takes a judge to determine that, and Judge Miller has already ruled in Clayton's favor. Until a higher authority overturns that ruling, I have to enforce the existing order. Brady's hand moved to his gun. "I'm sorry." Jack looked at the crowd, saw men he had known for 15 years, men whose horses he had shod, whose tools he had mended, whose children had played in this very yard back when Thomas was alive. Now they stood there with torches and rifles, ready to take a 9-year-old girl back to the man who beat her bloody. Fear made people into something less than human. "You're all willing to do this?" Jack asked. Not to Clayton, not to Brady, to the crowd. To the ordinary men who had somehow convinced themselves this was justice. "You're willing to send a child back to being whipped? Back to a man who probably murdered her parents? Because a piece of paper says it's legal?" Nobody answered. Several men looked away, but nobody moved. Clayton stepped forward. "Enough speeches. Sheriff, do your job or I'll have your badge." Brady drew his gun, pointed it at Jack. His hand was shaking. "Don't make this harder than it is." Jack heard movement behind him, turned. Sarah had come out of the back room despite his orders. She stood in the doorway, small and pale, still wearing the dress that used to be Martha's. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow, but were still visible. The bandages on her back showed through the thin fabric. She walked past Jack, stood at the edge of the porch, looked out at the crowd. "My name is Sarah Elizabeth Bennett," she said. Her voice was small but steady. "My mama and papa died when their wagon crashed. Uncle Clayton says it was an accident. But Papa told me 3 days before he died that Uncle Clayton had been threatening him, told me that if anything happened, I should run to Jack Reeves because he was the only man we could trust." She pulled at her dress, showing her back, the bandages, the outline of welts underneath. "Uncle Clayton did this to me, with his belt, the one with the 3 horses. He did it because I wouldn't sign papers giving him the ranch. Did it because I asked questions about how Mama and Papa died. Did it because I existed, and he wanted me gone." Sarah's voice strengthened. "Mr. Reeves didn't kidnap me. I ran to him. I begged him to help me. And he did, even though it cost him everything. Even though men like you are standing here with guns and torches ready to drag me back to more of the same." She looked directly at Clayton. "You killed my parents. You beat me. You tried to steal everything they built, and now you're using the law to finish what you started." The crowd shifted, uncomfortable. Several men lowered their torches. One of them, a rancher named Morris, who had known Tom Bennett, stepped forward. "Those welts look real," Morris said slowly, "and I remember Tom saying something about Clayton asking too many questions about his land. Didn't think much of it at the time." "The girl's lying," Clayton said sharply. "Children lie when they're scared, when they've been coached by desperate men." "Coached?" Sarah's voice went hard. "You want proof? Your belt buckle has a scratch on the middle horse, right hind leg. Got it when you threw the belt at me and it hit the wall. That scratch is stamped into my back. Doc Stone can testify to that." Clayton's face went white, then red. "That proves nothing." "It proves you hit her hard enough to mark her," Doc Stone called from the crowd. He stepped forward, medical bag in hand. "I examined those welts. They match the buckle pattern exactly, including the scratch. This child was beaten systematically, repeatedly, by someone wearing that specific belt." The crowd was turning. Jack could feel it. The tide shifting from fear to doubt, to something that might become outrage if pushed far enough. Clayton felt it too. His composure cracked. "This is absurd. I'm her legal guardian. What I do to discipline her is my business. The law gives me that right." "The law also says guardians can't abuse their wards." Whitmore stepped forward from the crowd, legal documents in hand. "The law says evidence of abuse invalidates guardianship, and the law says a properly filed will supersede emergency guardianship petitions filed after death." He held up Tom's will. "This document was filed 5 months before the Bennetts died, filed legally with the territorial clerk, notarized by me, witnessed by 3 people. It clearly states that Jack Reeves is to be Sarah's guardian. Your petition was filed 2 weeks after Tom's death. Too late. Tom's wishes were already on record." "Filed in secret," Clayton snarled. "Hidden from the family. That makes it suspicious." "Filed secretly because Tom Bennett was afraid of you," Whitmore shot back. "Afraid you'd do exactly what you did." kill him, and claim guardianship before anyone knew better. He told me everything in my office. How you'd threatened him, how you wanted his water rights, how you'd made similar threats to other ranchers who all ended up dead in convenient accidents. Clayton's hand moved toward his coat. Jack's hand moved toward his gun. "Don't," Sheriff Brady said quietly. His gun was still drawn, but now it was pointed at Clayton, not Jack. "I've heard enough. I think we all have." Clayton stared at him. "You're supposed to be enforcing the court order. I'm supposed to be enforcing the law. And I'm starting to think the law has been bent pretty far in your direction for a long time now." Brady looked at the crowd. "How many of you have lost family members in suspicious accidents near Clayton's property? How many have been pressured to sell land you didn't want to sell?" Silence. Then Morris spoke up. "My brother died in a barn fire 3 years back, after he refused to sell his water rights to Clayton. Fire marshal said it was accidental, but my brother was careful with fire. Real careful." Another voice. A woman. "My husband fell off a ladder at the lumber mill, Clayton's lumber mill. Day after they had an argument about wages. Never made sense to me." More voices. A pattern emerging from years of silence. A dozen deaths. 24 suspicious accidents. All around Clayton Ward's expanding empire. Clayton's face had gone rigid. "These are lies. Slander. All of you are turning on me because this drunk has convinced you with a forged will and a child's stories." "Now then, let's test it," Whitmore said. "Let's take this to the territorial governor. Let him review the evidence. If the will is forged, I'll face charges. If it's real, Jack keeps guardianship. If Sarah's been beaten, you face charges. If she hasn't, she goes back to you. Simple, fair, legal." Clayton looked around at the crowd that was no longer his, at the sheriff whose gun was pointed the wrong direction, at Jack standing on the porch, still alive, still defiant, still protecting the one thing standing between Clayton and 5,000 acres of prime land. Something in Clayton's face changed. The mask dropped completely. What was left was cold and calculating and desperate. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think so." He pulled a gun from his coat, fast, faster than a man his age should move, pointed it at Sarah. Jack moved without thinking. Threw himself forward off the porch between the gun and the girl, heard the shot, felt the impact like being kicked by a horse, hot pain spreading across his left shoulder. Then he was on the ground, looking up at the sky, hearing Sarah screaming, hearing boots running, hearing more gunshots, unsure who was firing. Doc Stone's face appeared above him. "Don't move. You're hit. Shoulder. Missed the artery, but you're bleeding bad." Jack tried to sit up. Doc pushed him back down. "I said don't move. Sarah. Elena has her. She's safe." "Clayton?" "Brady shot him, dead before he hit the ground." Jack closed his eyes. Let the relief wash over him along with the pain. It was over. Clayton was dead. Sarah was safe. The nightmare had ended. "Am I dying?" he asked. Doc snorted. "You're too stubborn to die, but you'll have a hell of a scar." Jack woke in Doc Stone's office, laid out on the examination table with his shoulder wrapped in bandages. Sarah sat beside him, holding his hand, her face tear-stained. "You jumped in front of a bullet," she said. Her voice shook. "You could have died." "But I didn't." "You could have." Jack tried to sit up. Pain lanced through his shoulder. He made it halfway before Doc appeared and pushed him back down. "Rest," Doc ordered. "You lost blood. Your body needs time." "How long was I out?" 6 hours. It's morning now." Jack looked around. The office was small, cluttered with medical supplies and books. Through the window he could see people gathering in the street, talking quietly, pointing toward Doc's office. "What's happening out there?" Jack asked. "Justice," Doc said. "Sheriff Brady arrested 3 of Clayton's men this morning, charged them with conspiracy to commit murder. Turns out when you threaten a man's life and he shoots you in self-defense, your hired guns become very willing to testify about all your other crimes to save their own necks." "The wagon crash?" "One of them admitted to filing the wheel bolt on Clayton's orders, said he was paid $50 and promised a job at the lumber mill." "The other deaths?" Brady's investigating all of them now. Looks like Clayton's been systematically murdering people for their land for 5 years. Could be prosecuted posthumously, but mostly it's just about clearing the names of the victims, giving their families closure. Sarah squeezed Jack's hand. It's over. Really over. Not quite, Whitmore said from the doorway. He held a telegram. This just came from the governor's office. Emergency review complete. Tom Bennett's will is confirmed as legitimate. Jack Reeves is Sarah's legal guardian. The ranch goes into trust until she's 18. All of Clayton's property claims are voided. He handed the telegram to Jack. You won. Legally, officially, completely. Jack read it again. Let the words sink in. They had won. Sarah was safe. The ranch was hers. Clayton was dead. The law had sided with justice for once. What happens now? Sarah asked quietly. Jack looked at her. Now we rebuild. We take the ranch back. We make it what your parents wanted it to be. We give you the life they hoped you'd have. And you? She looked at him seriously. What do you get out of this? Jack thought about his empty house, his failing forge, the letter from the bank that no longer mattered. 2,847 days of existing without living, of hammering metal because it was easier than feeling anything. Then he looked at Sarah, at this child who had knocked on his door and asked him to care again, who had trusted him when trust had nearly gotten her killed, who had stood in front of a mob and told the truth even when the truth was terrifying. I get a reason to live, Jack said quietly. I get a second chance at being someone worth knowing. I get to keep a promise to a dead friend, and maybe, if I'm lucky, become the man Martha and Thomas would want me to be. You already are that man. Not yet, but I'm trying. 2 weeks later, Jack and Sarah moved to the Bennett Ranch. The house was exactly as Tom and Rose had left it. Clothes still in closets. Dishes still in cabinets. Pictures on the walls of a family that no longer existed except in memory and in the girl who had Tom's stubborn determination and Rose's fierce intelligence. They spent the first week just cleaning, making the house livable again, airing out rooms that had been closed too long, opening windows, letting light in. Jack hired ranch hands, good men recommended by Morris and the other ranchers who had stood with them. Started rebuilding the herd, repaired fences, fixed the barn, did all the work that Tom would have done if he had lived. Sarah helped with everything. She learned to cook from Elena, who came out twice a week to teach her. Learned to manage books and accounts from Whitmore, who stayed on as the ranch's lawyer. Learned to ride and rope and shoot from Jack, who taught her the skills her father would have taught if he'd had the chance. At night they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the valley, the same valley Tom and Rose had looked at, the same mountains, the same sky. Tell me about them, Sarah would say. About Mama and Papa. And Jack would tell her everything he remembered, Tom's laugh, Rose's kindness. The way they had looked at each other like the rest of the world did not exist. The way they had built this ranch from nothing into something worth dying for. They loved you very much, Jack always finished. Everything they did was for you. I know, Sarah would say. That's why I have to make it count. 6 months after Clayton died, Jack stood in front of 3 graves on the hill above Sage Creek. Martha Reeves, Thomas Reeves, and next to them, a space he had always assumed would be his. He did not come here often. It hurt too much, but today felt important somehow, like an ending and a beginning happening at the same time. I kept my promise, he said to the graves, to Martha, to Thomas, to the family he had failed to save. I saved a child. I stood up when it mattered. I became someone you could be proud of again. The wind whispered through the grass. Birds sang in the trees. The sun warmed his face. Jack knelt down, touched Martha's headstone gently. I'll always love you, both of you, but I'm learning to live again, learning that surviving isn't the same as living. You'd want that for me. I know you would. He stood, looked back toward the valley where the Bennett Ranch sat, where Sarah was probably working on her schoolwork under Elena's watchful eye, where dinner would be waiting when he got home. Home. He had a home again. A family again. A reason to wake up in the morning again. It looked different than it had before, but maybe that was okay. Maybe second chances were supposed to look different. Maybe that was the whole point. Jack walked back down the hill, back toward the ranch. Back toward Sarah and the life they were building together. Behind him, the graves stood silent in the afternoon sun. Markers of a past that could not be changed. Reminders of a pain that would never fully heal. But ahead of him was a future, uncertain, challenging, but possible. And for the first time in 8 years, Jack Reeves believed that possible was enough. The horseshoe hung above the ranch house door, newly forged by Jack's own hands. He and Sarah had worked on it together. She had held the tongs. He had struck the metal. Together they had shaped something strong from raw material and heat and patience. Underneath it, carved into the wood, were words Jack had chosen carefully, built on promise, kept by love. Tom Bennett had trusted him with the most precious thing in his world, had believed that a broken man could become whole again if given a reason, had understood that redemption was not about erasing the past, but about choosing to face the future despite it. Jack stood on the porch looking out at land that stretched for miles, land that would belong to Sarah someday, land that she would build her own life on, land that represented everything her parents had worked for and everything Jack had fought to protect. Sarah came out to stand beside him, nearly 10 years old now, taller, stronger, still carrying scars on her back, but no longer carrying them in her heart. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Promises," Jack said, "and how the hardest ones to keep are usually the most important. Like the promise you made to Papa. Like that. Do you regret it? Everything it cost you?" Jack thought about his old forge, sold to pay for ranch repairs, his house on the hill, lost to the bank and sold to a young family, the solitary life he had lived for 8 years, given up for the chaos and challenge of raising a child. "No," he said, "I don't regret any of it." Sarah leaned against him. "Good, because I don't regret knocking on your door." They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Two people who had saved each other. Two survivors who had learned that family was not always about blood. Sometimes it was about choice, about standing up when it mattered, about keeping promises even when they hurt, about opening your door in a blizzard and saying yes to hope when everything in you wanted to say no. Jack put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. She was growing up fast. In 7 years she would be 18, would inherit the ranch, would make her own choices about her future. But until then, she was his responsibility, his family, his second chance at doing something right. "What do you think Papa would say?" Sarah asked quietly, "if he could see us now?" Jack thought about Tom Bennett, about a man who had looked at a broken blacksmith and seen potential, who had trusted the untrustworthy and believed the unbelievable, who had bet his daughter's life on the hope that people could change if given a reason. "I think he'd say we did all right," Jack answered. "I think he'd say thank you." "Do you think he's watching?" "I hope so." They went inside as full darkness fell. The ranch house was warm with lamplight and the smell of dinner cooking. Elena had left early, but her influence remained in the orderly kitchen, the clean floors, the sense that this was a home and not just a house. Sarah set the table. Jack carved the roast. They sat down across from each other, the way they did every night, and said grace. "For this food and this family," Jack said, "for second chances and kept promises, for people who believe in us when we don't believe in ourselves, we're grateful." "Amen," Sarah said. They ate, talked about the ranch, about school, about the new foal that had been born that morning. Normal conversation, normal life. The kind of normalcy that once seemed impossible and now felt like the most precious thing in the world. After dinner, Sarah worked on her arithmetic while Jack read the newspaper. Comfortable silence. The kind that only exists between people who trust each other completely. Around 9, Sarah put away her books. I'm going to bed. Sleep well?" She paused at the doorway, turned back. "Jack?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you opened the door that night." "So am I, little one, so am I." She disappeared up the stairs. Jack heard her moving around in her room, getting ready for bed. Heard the squeak of bed springs as she lay down. Heard the house settle into nighttime quiet. He stayed up a while longer, checking the locks, banking the fire, doing all the small tasks that made a house safe and secure, the tasks of a man who had something worth protecting. Before he went to his own room, Jack stepped outside one more time, looked up at the stars that burned cold and distant in the winter sky, thought about Martha and Thomas up there somewhere, watching, thought about Tom and Rose Bennett, hoping their trust had been well placed. "I'm doing my best," Jack said to the night. "It's not perfect, but it's real, and it's enough." The stars gave no answer, but Jack did not need one. He could feel the truth of it in his bones, in his healing shoulder, in his steady heartbeat. He had kept his promise. He had saved the child. He had become, once again, a man worth knowing. And tomorrow he would wake up and do it all again, because that was what promises meant. Not a single act of heroism, but a lifetime of showing up, of choosing to care, of refusing to give up no matter how hard it got. Jack Reeves went to bed that night and slept without dreams, without nightmares, without the crushing weight of guilt that had defined him for 8 years. He slept like a man at peace. And when morning came, he would wake to the sound of Sarah moving around downstairs, to the smell of coffee brewing, to the knowledge that someone needed him and trusted him and believed in him, to the knowledge that he had earned it. The last promise had been kept. Jack walked to the bedroom window one last time, looked south toward the hills where 3 graves stood in darkness. He could not see them from here, but he knew they were there. Martha, Thomas, the family he had failed. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," he whispered to the night. "But I saved her. I saved Sarah. That has to count for something." The wind gave no answer. The stars burned cold and silent. But inside Jack's chest, where guilt had lived for 8 years, something else was growing. Not forgiveness. He would never forgive himself for being drunk while his family burned. But perhaps, maybe, something close to peace. He had been broken. He had been lost. He had drowned in whiskey and grief for 2,920 days. But tonight, he was a father again, a guardian, a man who had kept his word when keeping it cost everything. Tomorrow they would wake and work and build, tomorrow and every day after, for as long as breath remained, because some promises were kept with words, and some were kept by living. Jack closed the window, checked the lock one final time, went to bed in a house that felt, for the first time in 8 years, like a home. The last promise had been kept, and the first morning of his new life would dawn in 5 hours. He intended to be ready for it.